At my grandmother's will reading, my cousin Stuart stood up, pointed at my son, and laughed with that cruel smirk he'd perfected since childhood. "Look at him," he announced to the room. "Grandma's charity case, waiting for handouts like always." The room went silent. Every head turned. I felt my son's hand tighten in mine as he shrank into his seat. Then the lawyer cleared his throat, adjusted his glasses, and said 6 words that changed everything. "We haven't gotten to Eleanor's letter. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. That was the moment our family would never be the same. But to understand how we got there, to that sterile conference room with its mahogany table and family daggers drawn, you need to know what happened before. Before my son became the target. Before my grandmother's final words cut through decades of pretense. Let me take you back. My name is Rebecca Mitchell. I'm 34, a single mom, a freelance graphic designer, and for the past decade, I've been the family disappointment. Not that they'd say it to my face. The Mitchells don't work that way. They prefer sideways glances, whispered comments just loud enough to hear, and the constant reminder that I didn't live up to the family legacy. The Mitchells are old money, the kind that's been in the same New England town for 6 generations. My grandfather built a shipping empire, and my father expanded it into real estate. My brother Lawrence followed the expected path: Ivy League education, married the right kind of woman, produced 2 perfect children, and took his place at Mitchell Holdings. I was supposed to do the same, and I tried. I really did. I went to the right schools, dated the right men, smiled at the right parties. But something always felt off, like I was wearing someone else's clothes that never quite fit. Then came my senior year of college when I fell in love with Daniel, a brilliant art student with kind eyes and no fortune to his name. My parents made their disapproval crystal clear. "He'll never fit into this family," my mother said over brunch at her country club, not bothering to lower her voice. "No connections, no prospects. Really, Rebecca, what are you thinking?" Thought I was thinking for myself for once. When I got pregnant at 23, they were mortified. When Daniel left 6 months after Leo was born, they were vindicated. "We told you so," hung in the air at every family gathering, though they rarely said it aloud. They didn't need to. My grandmother Eleanor was different, though. She'd been the family matriarch since my grandfather died 15 years ago. She ruled with a velvet-gloved iron fist, but she saw me, really saw me, when no one else did. When I showed up at her doorstep with a screaming 3-month-old and tear-stained cheeks, she didn't lecture. She just opened the door wider and said, "Come in, dear. Everyone stumbles. It's what you do next that matters." For the next 8 years, she was our safety net. She didn't bail us out completely. That wasn't her style. "You need to build your own strength," she'd say, watching me sketch designs late into the night while Leo slept. But she gave me space in her guest house while I got on my feet, watched Leo when clients needed last-minute meetings, and never, not once, made me feel less than. My cousins noticed, especially Stuart. As my grandmother's oldest grandchild, he'd always assumed he was the favorite. He managed a division of the family business, lived in a company-owned penthouse, and made sure everyone knew just how successful he was. He watched my grandmother's affection for Leo with barely disguised resentment. Teaching him to rely on handouts already? He'd mutter when Grandma would slip Leo a 20 for helping with her garden. The Mitchell work ethic skips a generation, I guess. Over the years, Leo and I built our life. I started my own design business, moved us into a small but cozy apartment, and made sure Leo knew the value of hard work and kindness, values my grandmother prized above wealth or status. Leo was quiet, thoughtful, with his father's artistic talent and a sensitivity that made him both brilliant and vulnerable. The family gatherings were the hardest. Christmas at the family estate, Thanksgiving at my parents' house, summer weekends at the lake house, each one a minefield of subtle digs and comparisons. My cousin's children in their private school uniforms beside Leo in his public school clothes. Comments about real careers versus my little drawing business. Leo absorbing it all, trying so hard to be invisible. "Why do we keep going?" he asked me once, after a particularly brutal Easter lunch, where my brother had detailed his son's acceptance to Phillips Exeter Academy, while pointedly not asking about Leo's schooling. "Because they're family," I said, the answer feeling hollow, even as I said it. "And because of Grandma." Leo nodded. He understood. Grandma was our ally in that Cold War. When she was diagnosed with cancer, everything accelerated. The family circled, not just in grief but in calculation. Who would get what? Who would she favor? The vultures barely waited for her to take to her bed before they began their circling. Stuart was the worst, suddenly visiting daily after years of perfunctory birthday calls. He brought his wife Julia and their twin boys, always dressed immaculately, always with some story of achievement to share. I watched my grandmother's tired eyes track their movements, saying little, but missing. Nothing. Leo and I visited differently. He would read to her, poetry, news, whatever caught his interest that day. I would bring fresh flowers for her room and sketches of projects I was working on. We didn't talk about the will or the family legacy. We just tried to make her remaining days peaceful. 2 weeks before she died, I found her alone in her study, surrounded by old photographs. "Come look at these with me," she said, patting the sofa beside her. "I want to tell you some stories while I still can." For hours, she shared memories I'd never heard, about her own struggles as a young woman, about falling in love with my grandfather despite her parents' objections, about the early years when the business almost failed. "People only see the success," she told me. "They forget the struggle that came before." As I was leaving, she gripped my hand with surprising strength. "You remind me of myself," she said. "More than any of them. Remember that." I nodded, throat tight with tears. I wouldn't let fall. She hated emotional displays. "And Rebecca?" she added as I reached the door. "You've done a magnificent job with Leo. Don't let anyone tell you different." She died peacefully in her sleep 3 days later. The funeral was exactly as she would have wanted it, dignified, restrained, with no excessive sentiment. The real drama was saved for the will reading scheduled for the following week. Which brings us back to that conference room. The whole family assembled like court nobles awaiting a royal decree. My parents, stiff and formal in matching charcoal gray. My brother Lawrence and his wife Catherine, their children perfectly behaved in miniature business attire. Stuart and Julia with their twins, all designer labels and practiced smiles. Various aunts, uncles, and cousins filling out the remaining seats. Leo and I arrived last. He was 13 now, gangly and uncertain in the suit we'd bought for the funeral. It was a little too big, room to grow, the salesman had said, and he looked uncomfortable as we took the only remaining seats at the far end of the table. Stuart noticed immediately. "Couldn't afford a proper tailor, Becca?" He stage whispered to Julia, just loud enough for several people to hear. "Shame. The boy already stands out enough." I felt Leo stiffen beside me. I squeezed his hand under the table, our silent code for ignore them. Mr. Harrington, my grandmother's attorney for 30 years, began the proceedings. He was meticulous and formal, exactly like the legal system my grandmother had respected. The initial distributions were unsurprising. Family heirlooms divided among her children. Generous but not excessive cash bequests to various grandchildren. Donations to her favorite charities. Household staff remembered with modest sums. As the major assets came into discussion, the tension in the room thickened. The family home, the art collection, the controlling shares in Mitchell Holdings, these were the prizes everyone was waiting for. The Mitchell family residence at 47 Maple Street, including all grounds and outbuildings. I leave to my granddaughter, Rebecca Mitchell, Mr. Harrington read, his voice neutral. The room erupted in whispers. My mother's face went white. Stuart looked like he'd been slapped. There must be a mistake, my father said, his voice tight. That house has always gone to the eldest son. The will is quite clear, Mr. Mitchell, the lawyer replied, unruffled. Before the shock could settle, he continued. Regarding my shares in Mitchell Holdings, constituting 51% ownership of the company. Everyone leaned forward. This was it. The real power. The true legacy. I place these shares in trust, to be managed by Rebecca Mitchell until her son, Leopold Daniel Mitchell, reaches the age of 25, at which time full ownership will transfer to him. The room exploded. Stuart shot to his feet, face mottled, red. This is outrageous. That boy? He's not even a real Mitchell. He's the result of Rebecca's mistake, her fling with some penniless artist. That's when he pointed at Leo, his fingers shaking with rage. Look at him. Grandma's charity case waiting for handouts like always. He doesn't know the first thing about the business. He doesn't deserve any of this. Leo seemed to shrink in his chair, his face burning with humiliation. At 13, he was old enough to understand every cutting word, young enough to still be wounded by them. I put my arm around him, fury rising in my throat. But before I could speak, Mr. Harrington cleared his throat. We haven't gotten to Eleanor's letter, he said, his quiet voice somehow cutting through the chaos. The room gradually quieted. Stuart remained standing, breathing heavily, until Julia tugged him back into his seat. Mr. Harrington pulled an envelope from his briefcase. The handwriting on the front was unmistakably my grandmother's. Elegant, precise, confident. Mrs. Mitchell requested that this letter be read aloud at the conclusion of the will reading in the presence of all family members, he explained. He broke the seal, unfolded several pages, and began to read. My dear family, my grandmother's words, filled the room. If you're hearing this, I've finally run out of time. I've never been one for emotional farewells, so I'll be direct. The decisions I've made in my will are not random, nor were they made lightly. They reflect not just my desires for the future of the Mitchell legacy, but my assessment of each of you. The room was absolutely silent now. Even Stuart seemed frozen. For 60 years, I've watched this family grow. I've seen how wealth shapes character, sometimes strengthening it, often corroding it. I've watched some of you become consumed by entitlement, by the belief that the Mitchell name alone makes you deserving. I've watched others work tirelessly despite having every advantage, never taking your position for granted. Mr. Harrington turned the page. Stuart, you've always assumed you would inherit the bulk of my estate. You've been waiting for it, counting on it, perhaps even planning how you would spend it while I was still breathing. Did you think I didn't notice how your visits increased when my health declined? How your interest in my welfare seemed directly proportional to your interest in my will? Stuart's face drained of color. Lawrence, you've done well in the business, but you've done so with every possible advantage. Silver spoons in every drawer. And you've passed that sense of entitlement to your children who've never heard the word no in their privileged lives. My brother stared at the table, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. Rebecca, Mr. Harrington continued reading, and I felt my heart skip. You made choices I didn't always understand, but you've shown me something rare in this family: resilience. When life knocked you down, you got back up. You built a life on your own terms. You raised a child who understands both privilege and responsibility, something I fear many in this room have forgotten. Tears blurred my vision. I felt Leo's hand tighten in mine, and Leopold. The lawyer's voice softened slightly as he read the next part. My quiet, watchful great-grandson. I've seen how you absorb everything around you, how you notice people's pain and try to ease it, bringing Mrs. Collins tea when she was overworked, helping Mr. Peterson with the heavy gardening. Without being asked, sitting with me in silence when words were too difficult. You have your mother's strength and something entirely your own, a compassion that can't be taught and can't be bought. Leo's shoulders straightened almost imperceptibly. I felt rather than saw him raise his head. The Mitchell fortune wasn't built on bloodlines, the letter continued. It was built on work, on risk, on seeing opportunities others missed. My husband, your grandfather, great-grandfather, started with nothing but determination. He would be disappointed to see how some of you have come to expect wealth rather than work for it. Mr. Harrington turned to the final page. I leave the house to Rebecca because she understands that a home is more than an asset. It's a sanctuary, a place where family bonds are either strengthened or broken. I leave the business in trust for Leopold because, young as he is, he has shown the character needed to lead with both intelligence and heart. This will undoubtedly cause discord. Some of you are already planning how to contest my decisions. Before you do, know that I've had the best legal minds ensure this will is ironclad, and know that any attempt to challenge it will trigger a clause requiring a complete forensic audit of all family business dealings for the past 20 years, including those off-the-books transactions some of you thought I didn't know about. Stuart went absolutely still. My father suddenly seemed very interested in his cufflinks. My final words to all of you are these. Legacy isn't about money. It's about values. It's about the mark you leave on others' lives. Some of you have disappointed me deeply in this regard. Others have made me prouder than I could express in life. Choose carefully how you proceed from here. The true Mitchell legacy is watching. With clear-eyed love, Eleanor Mitchell. Mr. Harrington refolded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. The silence in the room was absolute. No one moved. No one spoke. The weight of my grandmother's final judgment hung in the air, impossible to dismiss or deny. Then Leo stood up. All eyes turned to him. At 13, he was still growing into his height, but in that moment, he seemed suddenly older. He looked directly at Stuart, then swept his gaze across the rest of the family. I didn't ask for any of this, he said, his voice steady despite the slight tremor in his hands. And I don't want anything that makes this family hate each other more than they already do. He turned to Mr. Harrington. Can I speak with you? Privately about the trust? About possible alternatives? The lawyer looked surprised but nodded. Of course. As they moved toward the door, Leo paused and looked back at the table of stunned relatives. Grandma Eleanor told me once that money doesn't make people good or bad. It just makes them more of what they already are. I think she was right. With that, he walked out, back straight, head high. I watched him go, my heart simultaneously breaking and swelling with pride. In that moment, he was more of a Mitchell than anyone else in that room. He had my grandmother's spine of steel and her clear-eyed assessment of character. The family erupted into arguments the moment the door closed. Accusations flew. Old resentments bubbled to the surface. My father demanded to see documentation. Stuart threatened lawsuits. My mother wept dramatically. I sat quietly, watching it all unfold like I was observing strangers. In a way, they were. My grandmother's letter had drawn a line, and I suddenly realized I'd been standing on the other side of it for years without fully understanding. When Leo and Mr. Harrington returned 20 minutes later, the room quieted again. All eyes turned to my son, this unexpected heir who had just been thrust into the center of the family power struggle. Mr. Harrington has explained my options, Leo said, his voice stronger now. I'm not old enough to make binding legal decisions, but I've asked him to note my wishes for when I do come of age. I could see Mr. Harrington nod slightly, a hint of respect in his usually impassive face. The room held its collective breath as Leo continued. First, I want the company shares to be managed by a board of trustees, not just my mom, but also Uncle Lawrence and Aunt Patricia from Grandma's side. They know the business, and 3 voices are better than 1. I don't want decisions made out of spite or in reaction to what happened today. Stuart snorted. How magnanimous of the child, he muttered, but his wife grabbed his arm, silencing him. Second, Leo continued, ignoring the interruption, I want a portion of the profits each year to go to a scholarship fund for students interested in business who don't have the advantages we've had. My brother Lawrence's eyebrows shot up. My father looked like he might have a stroke. Third, when I'm 25, before I decide whether to take control or not, I want a full family meeting. A real one, where everyone speaks honestly. Because this, he gestured around the tense room, isn't what Grandma would have wanted for her legacy. The silence that followed felt endless. Finally, my father cleared his throat. I think we need time to process all this. His voice was controlled, carefully neutral, the businessman taking over now that the initial shock had passed. Of course, Mr. Harrington said, gathering his papers. I'll be in touch with all relevant parties regarding next steps. As the meeting broke up, people moved in tense clusters, whispering fiercely. No one approached Leo or me directly. They cast glances, some angry, some calculating, some simply confused. My mother walked past without looking at me, her way of showing disapproval since I was a child. Leo and I were the last to leave. As we stepped into the hallway, Stuart was waiting, leaning against the wall with forced casualness. Clever performance, kid, he said to Leo, his voice low. Did your mother coach you on that inspirational little speech? The vulnerable teenager with a heart of gold routine? I stepped forward, but Leo put his hand on my arm. I meant what I said, Stuart, he replied evenly. I don't want a war. I just want to honor what Grandma believed in. Stuart's face darkened. You have no idea what you've stepped into. This isn't some school project. This is decades of family blood, sweat, and tradition. You think you can waltz in with your public school education and your second-hand suit and understand what it takes to be a Mitchell? I'd heard enough. That's exactly why Grandma chose him, Stuart. Because he understands what you've forgotten, that the name isn't what matters. It's the character behind it. Stuart's lip curled. Save the Hallmark sentiments, Becca. This isn't over. He pushed off the wall and walked away, his expensive shoes clicking on the marble floor. Leo let out a long breath when he was gone. I meant what I said, Mom. I don't want to make things worse. I hugged him tight. You didn't. You made me prouder than I've ever been. The drive home was quiet. Both of us were processing everything that had happened. As we pulled into our apartment complex, the modest 2-bedroom we'd called home for the past 5 years, Leo finally spoke. Are we going to move into Grandma's house? He asked. I hadn't even thought that far ahead. I don't know. Would you want to? He considered this seriously. It's a beautiful house, but it's so big, and everyone would be watching us there, waiting for us to mess up. I nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. We don't have to decide anything tonight. We've got time. That night, after Leo went to bed, I sat on our small balcony, staring at the city lights. My phone had been buzzing constantly. Missed calls from my parents, from Lawrence, from cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. I'd turned it to silent. Whatever storm was brewing in the family, it could wait until morning. I thought about my grandmother's letter. She'd seen me, really seen me, when I'd felt invisible to the rest of the family for so long. She'd valued the strength it took to rebuild after Daniel left, to create a life on my own terms, to raise Leo with values that mattered. In a family that measured worth by bank accounts and social connections, she'd seen something else entirely. The next morning brought the first salvo in what would become known in my mind as the Mitchell War. My father arrived at our apartment unannounced, looking uncomfortable in our modest lobby. The doorman, unused to visitors in tailored suits, called up with uncertainty in his voice. "It's all right, Carlos," I told him. "My father can come up." He arrived at our door slightly out of breath from the 4-flight walk-up. Our building's elevator was perpetually out of service, a quirk that had never bothered me until I saw it through my father's eyes. "Rebecca," he said, his eyes darting around our apartment, taking in the second-hand furniture, the wall covered. In Leo's artwork, the desk in the corner piled with my design projects. "We need to talk." I offered him coffee, which he declined with barely concealed disdain for what he probably assumed was inferior beans. We sat at our small kitchen table, the morning sun streaming through the windows I'd hung with Leo's stained glass projects from summer camp. "Your mother and I have been discussing the situation," he began, as if my inheritance was a PR crisis to be managed. "We think the most practical solution is for you to sell the house to Lawrence. He can pay market value, of course. And regarding the business shares—" "I'm not selling the house, Dad," I interrupted. "And the business shares aren't mine to sell. They're in trust for Leo." My father's jaw tightened. "Be reasonable, Rebecca. What do you know about managing property of that size, or overseeing business interests of this magnitude? You design logos for coffee shops." The old dismissal still stung, but not as deeply as it once had. "I design branding strategies for businesses across 3 states, actually. My client list includes 4 companies on the Regional Growth Index. But that's beside the point. Grandma made her wishes clear. Eleanor was not herself in her final months," he said carefully. "The medications, the pain, they affected her judgment." I felt anger rising. "She was sharp as ever until the end. You know that." He leaned forward. "Rebecca, you're not seeing the bigger picture. This disruption threatens everything the family has built. Stuart is already talking to lawyers. Your brother feels betrayed. Your mother is heartbroken. Because Grandma recognized Leo's potential? Or because she recognized my resilience? Which part has everyone so upset?" My father sighed heavily. "Politics, Rebecca. Family politics. There's a natural order to these things, traditions, expectations." "Maybe those expectations needed challenging," I said quietly. "Maybe that's exactly what Grandma was doing." He stood, frustration evident in every line of his body. "Think about it. That's all I'm asking. Think about what this means for the family, for Leo. Does he really need this kind of pressure? This kind of target on his back?" After he left, I sat alone at the table, his words echoing. He wasn't entirely wrong about the target part. Stuart wasn't the type to accept defeat gracefully. And Leo was just 13, still finding himself, still vulnerable to the family's judgment. Then I thought about my grandmother's letter, about her clear-eyed assessment of everyone, including me. She wouldn't have made this decision lightly. She wouldn't have put Leo in this position if she didn't believe he could handle it, with the right support. Over the next weeks, the family divided into factions. My parents and Stuart formed the opposition, determined to find a legal loophole. Lawrence and his wife Catherine remained cautiously neutral, recognizing the benefits of the trust arrangement Leo had proposed. The extended family took sides, many automatically aligning with my father out of habit or self-interest. Only my Aunt Patricia, my mother's younger sister who had always been the family rebel, reached out in genuine support. Eleanor knew exactly what she was doing. She told me over coffee at a neutral cafe downtown. She saw how this family was becoming poisoned by entitlement. Stuart, especially. He's treated the company like his personal ATM for years. Your father covers for him, but Eleanor knew. Why didn't she say something while she was alive? I asked. Patricia smiled sadly. Eleanor played the long game. Always did. She believed foundations had to be solid before you built anything lasting on them. She was preparing you and Leo for years. You just didn't realize it. The most unexpected reaction came from Leo's father, Daniel. We'd maintained a distant but cordial relationship over the years. He lived on the West Coast now, remarried with 2 young daughters. He called after hearing the news. I don't want anything from the estate, he said immediately. I just want to make sure Leo is okay with all this pressure. He's handling it better than most of the adults, I told him honestly. But it's a lot. There's been talk about private school, about proper training for his future role. My father's suddenly very interested in his education. Daniel was quiet for a moment. What does Leo want? It was such a simple question, but one that the rest of the family had never thought to ask. He wants things to be fair, I said. He doesn't understand why money makes people so angry, and he misses his grandmother. They were close. He has your moral compass, Daniel said. That's a good thing. But Rebecca, watch out for Stuart. He was a bully when we were in college, and people like that don't change. They just get better at hiding it. The warning wasn't necessary. Stuart had already begun his campaign. First came the legal challenges. Claims that my grandmother had been unduly influenced, that the will violated previous family agreements. Mr. Harrington handled these efficiently, producing documentation of my grandmother's mental competence and her legal right to distribute her assets as she wished. When legal channels failed, Stuart turned to social pressure. Suddenly, Leo and I were invited to every family function we'd previously been peripheral to. Not out of inclusion, but scrutiny. Each appearance became a test, with Stuart watching for any misstep, any sign that we weren't Mitchell enough to deserve our inheritance. Leo felt it keenly. After a particularly uncomfortable dinner at my parents' house where Stuart had questioned Leo about business concepts no 13-year-old would know, Leo locked himself in his room for hours. When he finally emerged, his eyes were red but determined. I need to learn, he said simply. Not for them, for Grandma. She believed I could do this. That night, I made a decision. The next morning, I called Mr. Harrington and arranged to see the house. My house now, though it still didn't feel real. Eleanor's home stood on 2 acres of landscaped grounds at the edge of the historical district. 3 stories of elegant architecture, with wide windows and a wraparound porch where she'd spent summer evenings watching the sunset. It had been closed up since her death, maintained by a caretaker who visited weekly. As we walked through the quiet rooms, dust covers draping the furniture like ghosts, I realized something important. This wasn't just a piece of property or a status symbol. It was the place where my grandmother had welcomed me when I had nowhere else to go. Where she had bounced Leo on her knee and told him stories of her own childhood. Where she had taught me about resilience not through lectures, but through example. In her study, everything remained as she'd left it. Books lined the walls. Business, literature, history, art. Her desk stood by the window, organized and precise. Even in her absence, I ran my hand over the polished wood, remembering how she would sit there in the mornings, reading correspondence, managing her affairs with quiet efficiency. "Mom," Leo called from across the room. He stood by a small side table, holding a leather-bound journal. "I found this. It has my name on it." I joined him, looking at the journal. On its cover, in my grandmother's elegant handwriting, was simply, "For Leopold." Leo looked at me, uncertainty in his eyes. "Should I open it?" I nodded. "I think she meant you to find it." He carefully opened the journal. Inside, written on the first page, "Leopold, my observant one. If you're reading this, I've moved on and you've inherited a responsibility you never asked for." These pages contain what I wish I could tell you. In person, about business, yes, but more importantly, about character. About the real Mitchell legacy, not the one others think it is. Read a page each day. Take your time. Grow into the person I already see in you. With love and confidence, your grandmother. What followed were pages of my grandmother's thoughts, advice, and stories, carefully dated. She had started writing it 3 years ago, well before her illness. She had been planning this all along. Leo clutched the journal to his chest, tears welling in his eyes. She knew, he whispered. She knew I'd be scared. I put my arm around him. She knew you'd be ready too. In time. That visit changed something for both of us. The house wasn't just a valuable property anymore. It was a connection to a woman who had seen our potential when others hadn't. It was part of our path forward. The next day, I made 2 decisions that would alter our course permanently. First, I hired a contractor to prepare the house for us to move in. Not immediately, but soon. Second, I scheduled a meeting with the board of Mitchell Holdings. Stuart was livid when he heard I was exercising my rights as trustee to attend the quarterly board meeting. He called late that night, not bothering with pleasantries. "What do you think you're doing?" he demanded. "You don't know the first thing about our business operations." "Then I guess I'll learn," I replied calmly. "That's why I'm coming, to listen and understand. This isn't a training seminar, Rebecca. These are serious discussions with serious consequences. You can't just walk in and play businesswoman because Eleanor had a sentimental moment." I took a deep breath. "Stuart, I'm Leo's trustee until he's of age. That means I have a responsibility to understand what he's inheriting. I'm not coming to take over or make changes. I'm coming to learn." "You'll embarrass yourself," he warned, "and by extension, the family." "Maybe," I admitted, "but that's my risk to take." The day of the meeting, I dressed carefully, professional but still authentically me, not trying to blend in with the old guard, but not purposely standing out either. I wore a jacket I'd designed myself over a simple dress, comfortable but stylish shoes, and my mother's pearls, the one gift from her I'd always treasured. The Mitchell Holdings boardroom was intimidating by design. All dark wood, leather chairs, and city views. Oil paintings of past Mitchell patriarchs lined the walls, my grandfather's portrait largest among them. 14 men and 3 women were already seated when I arrived, exactly 5 minutes early. My father and Stuart among them, along with Lawrence and various executives I vaguely recognized from family events. The room quieted as I entered. Stuart's smile was predatory. My father looked resigned. Lawrence gave me a small nod. Not quite support, but not opposition either. I took the empty seat that had been Eleanor's, feeling the weight of every eye in the room. The board chairman, Walter Griffith, an old friend of my grandfather's, called the meeting to order. "As you all know, we have a new face joining us today. Rebecca Mitchell is here representing the trust established for her son Leopold, who is now the beneficial owner of Eleanor Mitchell's shares in the company." Murmurs around the table. I smiled politely, meeting each gaze directly. "Let's begin with the quarterly report," Walter continued, nodding to the CFO. What followed was 3 hours of detailed financial discussions, strategic planning, and operational reviews. I listened intently, taking careful notes, asking clarifying questions when necessary but mostly absorbing. I knew business basics from running my own small company, but the scale here was entirely different. Stuart watched me like a hawk, clearly waiting for me to make a mistake, to reveal my ignorance. I didn't give him the satisfaction. When I didn't understand something, I wrote it down to research later rather than exposing my lack of knowledge. As the meeting concluded, Walter addressed me directly. "Do you have any questions or concerns you'd like to raise, Ms. Mitchell?" I felt Stuart's smirk without having to look at him. He expected me to fumble or back down. Instead, I straightened. my notes, and looked around the table. "Just one observation," I said calmly. "In the marketing budget projections, I noticed allocations for traditional advertising channels increased by 12%, while digital engagement strategies only increased by 3%. Given the demographic research presented earlier showing our customer base skewing younger, I wonder if that balance reflects our best strategic interests." Silence. The marketing director looked startled, then thoughtful. My father's eyebrows rose slightly. "An interesting point," Walter said after a moment. "Perhaps something for the marketing committee to consider in more detail." As the meeting broke up, I could feel the recalibration happening around me. I wasn't just the family disappointment anymore. I wasn't just Leo's mother. I was a presence they would have to contend with. Lawrence approached me as I gathered my things. "That was a good catch about the marketing budget," he said quietly. "I've had the same thought, but hadn't found the right moment to raise it." "Thanks," I replied, surprised by the olive branch. "I have a lot to learn about everything else." He hesitated, then said, "Eleanor always had a good eye for potential, in business and in people." He glanced at Stuart, who was huddled with my father across the room, both looking displeased. "Not everyone here plays fair. Be careful." I nodded, understanding the warning. "I'm not here to disrupt Lawrence. I'm here to protect Leo's interests, which include a healthy, ethical family business." "Good," he said. "Because I think that's what she wanted too." As I left the building, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years within my family context. A glimmer of confidence. Not because I'd impressed anyone or proven myself, but because I'd been true to my abilities and limitations. I'd shown up authentically, not trying to be what the Mitchells had always wanted me to be. That evening, as Leo and I ate dinner at our kitchen table, I told him about the meeting. "Were you scared?" he asked. "Terrified," I admitted. But I remembered something Grandma told me once. She said fear just means you're doing something that matters. Leo nodded, considering this. "Do you think we're doing the right thing? Moving into her house, getting involved with the business?" I looked at my son, so thoughtful, so burdened with family expectations and conflicts not of his making, yet so determined to find his own way through them. "I think we're honoring her trust in us," I said. "And I think that means figuring out our own path, not just doing what everyone else expects." Leo smiled then, a real smile that reached his eyes. Grandma would like that. That night, I found him sitting in our small living room, reading by the window. Eleanor's journal open in his lap, his face intent on her words. The sight filled me with a complicated mixture of emotions: pride, worry, hope, determination. Whatever came next with the Mitchell family drama, I knew one thing for certain. Leo and I would face it together, guided by Eleanor's wisdom and our own growing strength. The legacy she'd left wasn't just wealth or property or business holdings. It was the courage to define success on our own terms. Moving into Grandma Eleanor's house was not as simple as packing boxes and changing our address. It required navigating a minefield of family politics, community scrutiny, and our own doubts. The house itself seemed to resist change, each room still resonating with my grandmother's presence 3 months after her passing. The first afternoon we brought some of our belongings, I found Leo standing in the doorway of Eleanor's study, hesitant to enter. "It feels wrong," he said quietly, "like we're intruding." I understood completely. The house had been Eleanor's domain for decades, her authority imprinted on every surface. Now it was supposed to be ours, but neither of us quite believed it yet. "We're not replacing her," I said, setting down the box I was carrying. "We're continuing what she started." "There's a difference." Leo nodded, but his eyes still tracked around the room, taking in the shelves of leather-bound books, the antique desk, the framed family photographs spanning generations. "Can we keep it like this?" he asked. Her study, I mean, as a reminder. I put my arm around his shoulders, noticing with a small shock that I barely had to reach down anymore. At 13, he was already approaching my height, his childhood features shifting toward the young man he would become. We can keep what matters, I promised, and change what needs changing, just like she would have wanted. The local moving. Company arrived the following weekend. I'd hired them despite my father's insistence that the family service would handle everything. I wanted ordinary people, not Mitchell employees who would report back on every decision we made. As the movers carried in our modest furniture, the comfortable sofa we'd bought secondhand, Leo's desk with its collection of robotics trophies, my workstation with its large monitor and drawing tablet, I could feel the house holding its breath, adjusting to our presence. Our things looked smaller here, less substantial against the high ceilings and ornate moldings. Mrs. Reynolds, who had been my grandmother's housekeeper for 20 years, watched from the doorway with carefully neutral expression. I'd asked her to stay on despite my father's suggestion that we upgrade the staff. "It will take some time to make it your own, Ms. Mitchell," she said as the movers finished with the last box. Every house has to learn its new family. "I'm not sure we belong here yet," I admitted. Her eyes softened. "Your grandmother wouldn't have chosen you if she didn't believe you belonged." She straightened her shoulders. "Now, I've prepared. A light dinner in the kitchen. Nothing fancy, but you'll need your strength for unpacking." That first meal in the cavernous kitchen felt surreal. Leo and I sat at the small breakfast table rather than the formal dining room, eating Mrs. Reynolds' chicken soup and fresh bread. The kitchen had always been the heart of the house, even when I was young. Eleanor had valued proper dining etiquette, but she'd also believed in the simple pleasure of good food eaten without pretense. "Grandma used to let me help knead the bread," Leo said, breaking the silence. "She said I had good hands for it." I smiled, grateful for the memory. "She taught me to make her famous apple tarts here. I was about your age. I made such a mess with the flour that Mrs. Reynolds threatened to ban us both." "She did no such thing," Mrs. Reynolds called from the pantry, a smile in her voice. "Though I did consider it when you attempted puff pastry." That small exchange broke some of the tension. The house might still be learning us, but we didn't have to be strangers within its walls. There were threads of connection already woven, memories that belonged to us as much as to Eleanor. That night, I couldn't sleep. The master bedroom, my bedroom now, felt too large, too formal. I wandered downstairs and found myself drawn to the back porch where my grandmother had often sat in the evenings. The night was clear, stars visible, despite the city lights. I wrapped myself in an old cardigan I'd found hanging by the door, breathed in the faint scent of Eleanor's perfume still lingering in its fibers, and tried to imagine what she would make of all this. Would she approve of how I'd handled the board meeting? Would she understand my decision to move slowly, to take our time adjusting? Would she recognize the fear beneath my determination? "You look like her sitting there." I turned to find Mrs. Reynolds in the doorway, a mug of tea in her hand, which she offered to me. "Chamomile with honey," she said. "Eleanor's cure for restless nights." I accepted gratefully. I don't think I'm anything like her. She was so certain about everything. Mrs. Reynolds settled into the other chair with a sigh. That came later, after Mr. Mitchell passed. Before that, she second-guessed herself constantly. Wondered if she was making the right choices for the family, for the company. This was a side of my grandmother I'd never seen. The Eleanor I knew had been formidable, decisive, occasionally intimidating in her clarity of purpose. "What changed?" I asked. She realized that doubt wasn't the problem. It was letting others see it. Mrs. Reynolds smiled slightly. Eleanor believed that confidence wasn't about having all the answers. It was about trusting yourself to find them, even when the path wasn't clear. I sipped the tea, letting her words settle. The family expects me to fail, especially Stuart. Expectations are powerful things, she replied, but they only control you if you accept them. We sat in companionable silence for a while, the night air cool against my face. I thought about Eleanor sitting in this same spot, perhaps having similar moments of uncertainty before reshaping herself into the tower of strength the family depended on. Leo has her journals, I said finally. He reads them every night. Mrs. Reynolds nodded. She worked on those for years, said some lessons couldn't be taught directly, they had to be discovered through someone else's journey. I wish she'd left one for me, I admitted. She left you this. Mrs. Reynolds gestured toward the house, the grounds, the life we were stepping into. She trusted you to write your own story. The next morning, reality intruded on our tentative adjustment in the form of Stuart's silver Mercedes pulling into the driveway. Leo and I were eating breakfast when Mrs. Reynolds announced his arrival with thinly veiled disapproval. He insisted. It was urgent family business, she said, emphasizing insisted, in a way that made it clear she found his manner wanting. Stuart strode into the kitchen as if he still had every right to be there, his gaze sweeping over our half-unpacked boxes. Leo's school books spread across the counter, my laptop open to a client project. Getting comfortable, I see, he said, his smile not reaching his eyes. Though I'm surprised you're using the service entrance. This is the kitchen, Stuart, I replied calmly. We're having breakfast, like people do. He ignored the response, turning instead to Leo. Hello, nephew. Adjusting to your new position as heir apparent? Leo stiffened beside me. I'm adjusting to a new house, he said carefully, and missing my grandmother. Something flickered across Stuart's face. Annoyance, perhaps, at being denied the confrontation he sought, or possibly genuine grief. It was easy to forget that Eleanor had been his grandmother too, that he'd had his own relationship with her, however complicated. Why are you here, Stuart? I asked. He straightened. All business now. The Reynolds Foundation Gala is next. Weekend. It's the most significant social event in the business community's calendar. The Mitchells always attend as a family, and Eleanor always purchased a full table. I waited for the point, though I could already guess where this was heading. As the current occupant of this house and trustee of Leopold's shares, your absence would be noticed and commented upon. His tone made it clear how disastrous he considered this possibility. The foundation expects our continued support. I knew about the Reynolds Foundation, of course. It funded arts education in underserved communities, a cause my grandmother had championed for decades. The annual gala was indeed a significant event, though more for the networking opportunities than the actual charitable impact. We'll consider it, I said, unwilling to commit with Stuart looming over us. His expression hardened. This isn't optional, Rebecca. This is about maintaining the family's position in the community, about honoring commitments Eleanor made. Leo spoke up unexpectedly. What does the foundation do exactly? Grandma mentioned it, but I never really understood. Stuart seemed taken aback by the question. It supports arts programs in schools and community centers. Which ones? Leo pressed. And how? Do they fund teachers' salaries or buy supplies or what? Stuart's face reddened slightly. I'm sure that information is available on their website. The point is, I interrupted, that if we're going to attend as representatives of Eleanor's legacy, we should understand exactly what we're supporting. I smiled at Leo, proud of his questions. We'll look into it and let you know our decision. Stuart clearly hadn't expected resistance. The table costs $50,000, he said bluntly. It's already been reserved in the Mitchell name. Your absence would be a public statement. So would our presence, I countered. Either way, it will be our choice. After he left, his displeasure evident in the squeal of tires on the circular driveway, Leo looked at me with concern. Are we going to go? I don't know yet, I answered honestly. Let's find out more first. That afternoon, we did exactly that. Instead of continuing to unpack, we sat at Eleanor's desk, researching the Reynolds Foundation. What we discovered was both better and worse than I'd expected. The foundation did indeed fund arts education, but its administrative costs were suspiciously high. Of every dollar donated, only 62 cents reached actual programs. The board consisted entirely of business associates from Eleanor's generation, with no artists or educators among them. It seems like it's more about the networking than the cause, Leo observed, scrolling through pictures from past galas. Look, there's Stuart with the mayor, and Uncle Lawrence with that guy who owns the baseball team. I nodded, feeling conflicted. Eleanor had supported this foundation loyally, but I wondered if she'd been aware of how little of the money actually reached students. It didn't align with the values she'd expressed in her letter, or with the careful philanthropy she'd practiced in other areas. What if we go, but do it differently? Leo suggested suddenly. What if we use it as a chance to actually learn about arts education needs, not just take pictures with important people? I looked at my son with growing admiration. Once again, he was seeing possibilities where others saw only obligations or opportunities for self-promotion. That's brilliant, I said. A chance to honor Grandma's commitment while maybe steering things in a better direction. The week before the gala became a crash course in Mitchell family politics. My mother called daily with suggestions about what I should wear, who I should speak to, which family traditions I should observe. My father sent detailed briefing notes on key business contacts who would be attending. Even Lawrence reached out to offer advice on navigating the event. The seating chart is crucial, he explained over coffee at a neutral downtown cafe. Eleanor always put significant thought into who sat where at our table. It sends messages about alliances, priorities. I thought it was just about making sure conversation flowed, I said, somewhat naively. Lawrence's smile was tired but genuine. Nothing is just about one thing in this family. Everything is a statement. I absorbed his advice with growing awareness of the complexity of the world Eleanor had navigated so effortlessly. The business meetings, the social obligations, the family dynamics. She had balanced it all while making it look natural. Why? Are you helping me? I asked finally. Stuart clearly wants me to fail. Dad thinks I'm in over my head. But you've been kind. Lawrence considered the question, stirring his coffee though he took it black. Eleanor saw something in you. And Leo, I trust her judgment. That's it? He sighed. And maybe I'm tired of the games. The constant jockeying for position, the alliances, the backstabbing. Catherine and I have been talking about stepping back, spending more time with the kids before they're grown. This was surprising. Lawrence had always seemed the dutiful son, following precisely in our father's footsteps. Does Dad know? Not yet. It would disappoint him greatly. His expression turned rueful. But I'm 48, Rebecca. I've spent my entire life meeting Mitchell family expectations. At some point, you have to ask if the price is worth it. I studied my brother with new eyes. Perhaps Eleanor's final decisions had created space for more than just Leo and me to reconsider our paths. The night of the gala arrived with all the pressure of a final exam. Mrs. Reynolds helped me prepare, her practiced hands fastening the delicate clasp on the pearl necklace that had been my grandmother's. Eleanor wore these to her first foundation. Gala, she said, adjusting the strand so it lay perfectly. She was nervous, too. I smoothed the front of my dress, midnight blue, simple but elegant, chosen for its understated quality rather than flash. I find that hard to believe. Oh, she hit it well, but new roles always require adjustment. Mrs. Reynolds stepped back, assessing. You look lovely. Different from Eleanor, but equally commanding in your own way. Leo knocked on the door then, looking both grown up and achingly young in his first tuxedo. "Is this right?" he asked, tugging at the bow tie. "Perfect," I assured him, though emotion made my voice catch. In that moment, I could almost see the man he would become, carrying both his own unique qualities and echoes of his heritage. The drive to the downtown hotel where the gala was held was quiet, both of us lost in thought. The valets recognized Eleanor's car, their faces registering momentary confusion before they recovered their professional demeanor. "Welcome, Ms. Mitchell. Mr. Mitchell," the head valet said, accepting the keys. "It's good to see the family continuing Mrs. Eleanor's traditions." The subtle reminder that we were now the public face of the Mitchell legacy sent a fresh wave of anxiety through me. As we approached the grand ballroom, I could see Stuart and Julia already holding court near the entrance, surrounded by business associates. My parents stood nearby, my mother resplendent in emerald silk, my father distinguished in his tuxedo with the family cufflinks Eleanor had given him on their wedding day. The moment they spotted us, a ripple seemed to move through the assembled guests. Conversations paused, heads turned. I felt Leo's hand slip into mine, a gesture of solidarity we both needed. "Remember what we're here for," I murmured. "Not their approval. Eleanor's legacy as we understand it." We approached the family group, accepting air kisses from my mother, a stiff handshake from my father, cool acknowledgement from Stuart and Julia. "You're late," my mother whispered as she embraced me. "The Harrises were asking about you." "We're exactly on time," I replied. "The invitation said 7. Stuart smirked. "The invitation says 7. The family always arrives at 6:30 for the pre-event meeting with the foundation board." "We weren't informed of that," I said simply, refusing to be baited. "We're here now." The next hour was a masterclass in subtle social dynamics. Every introduction carried weight. Every conversation contained undercurrents. I watched as Stuart deliberately steered key business contacts away from us, as my father emphasized Leo's youth to potential mentors, as my mother managed to convey with every introduction that I was still finding my way. But I also noticed something they missed. The younger generation of business leaders seemed genuinely interested in talking to us. The artists and program directors invited as token representatives of the foundation's mission gravitated to our end of the table. Leo asked thoughtful questions about arts education needs, and I shared perspectives from my design background. By the time dinner was served, a clear division had emerged at the Mitchell table. The old guard clustered around Stuart and my father, talking business and politics. The new voices gathered around Leo and me, discussing innovation, community, impact, and the changing landscape of philanthropy. During the main course, the foundation director gave his annual address, a polished but generic speech about the importance of arts education, long on platitudes and short on specific outcomes. As polite applause followed, Leo leaned over to whisper. He didn't mention a single actual student or show any of their work. I nodded, increasingly convinced that our instincts about the foundation had been correct. This was primarily a networking event draped in charitable language. Eleanor had supported it loyally, but I wondered again if she'd recognized its limitations. As coffee was served, the foundation chairman approached our table, making a point of greeting each Mitchell individually. When he reached Leo and me, his smile turned particularly expansive. "Ms. Mitchell, young Mr. Mitchell, what a pleasure to see Eleanor's legacy continuing through you. She was our most dedicated supporter. She believed deeply in arts education," I acknowledged. "Could you tell us more about your current programs? Leo is particularly interested in how students benefit directly." The chairman seemed momentarily thrown by the specific question. "Well, we fund various initiatives across the city, visiting artist programs, materials grants, that sort of thing." "Do you have outcome metrics?" Leo asked. "Grandma's journals. mentioned how important she thought measurable impact was in philanthropy. I had to suppress a smile at the chairman's discomfort. Eleanor's journals had indeed mentioned impact metrics, though not specifically about this foundation. Leo was applying her wisdom perfectly. "We could have those sent to you," the chairman offered vaguely. "But tonight is a celebration of the arts. Young man, I understand you're to inherit quite the responsibility, quite the legacy." Leo met his gaze steadily. "Yes, sir. That's why I'm trying to understand it fully. Grandma wouldn't have wanted me to support things blindly, even causes she believed in." From across the table, I could feel Stuart watching this exchange with narrowed eyes. This wasn't the compliant, overawed teenager he'd expected. This was a young man thinking independently, asking questions the comfortable establishment preferred to avoid. As the evening progressed, I became increasingly aware of how Eleanor must have felt at these events. The constant performance, the careful navigation of competing interests, the balance between public image and private values. But I also began to see opportunities she might have missed, locked as she was in the traditions of her generation. When the time came for table hosts to make donation pledges, Stuart leaned forward expectantly. This was traditionally Eleanor's moment to make a grand gesture, reinforcing the family's position. I stood, feeling every eye on me. The weight of expectation was palpable. "The Mitchell family has supported this foundation for 23 years, I began. "My grandmother believed deeply in arts education as a pathway to opportunity." Approving nods around the table. "Tonight I'd like to honor that commitment, but with a new approach. Instead of simply writing a check, we'd like to establish a new initiative within the foundation, the Eleanor Mitchell Student Impact Program." Murmurs of surprise rippled through the ballroom. "This program will provide direct funding to student projects, with oversight from actual arts educators and working artists. It will include a mentorship component, pairing students with professionals in their field of interest. And most importantly, it will require rigorous impact assessment, measuring not just how many students are served, but how their lives and opportunities are genuinely improved." I could see Stuart's face darkening, my father's brow furrowing, but I continued. "To launch this initiative, we'll commit the same $50,000 as in previous years, but with the stipulation that it be directed entirely to student support, not administrative costs. Additionally, I will personally volunteer my design, services for program materials, and Leopold will serve on a new youth advisory board, bringing student perspectives to the foundation's work." The applause that followed was tentative at first, then gathering strength, led by the younger business leaders and program directors. Even some of the old guard seemed cautiously supportive, perhaps recognizing the public relations value of such an approach. The foundation chairman recovered quickly, stepping forward to express enthusiastic support for this bold new direction, though the strain in his smile suggested otherwise. As we returned to our seats, Leo's eyes were bright with excitement. "That was amazing," he whispered. "Did you see their faces?" "I saw," I confirmed, feeling a mixture of exhilaration and trepidation. We had just publicly redirected a significant Mitchell family tradition. There would be consequences. They arrived sooner than expected. As the gala wound down and guests began to depart, Stuart cornered us by the coat check. "Quite the performance," he said, his voice low and controlled. "Undermining decades of carefully cultivated relationships for your moment in the spotlight." "That's not what happened," Leo defended before I could speak. "We're honoring Grandma's values, not just her traditions." Stuart's gaze flickered to Leo, then back to me. "You've filled his head with self-importance. He's 13, Rebecca. He should be worrying about math tests and baseball, not playing corporate air." "He's thinking for himself," I corrected, just as Eleanor believed he could, just as she trusted me to help him do. "This isn't over," Stuart warned. "The board..." won't forget this public challenge. Neither will the family." As his words hung in the air, I felt a strange calm settle over me. "Good," I said simply. "It's time for some things to change." On the drive home, Leo was uncharacteristically quiet. I glanced over, concerned that Stuart's confrontation had dampened his spirits. "You okay?" I asked. He nodded slowly. "I was just thinking about what Grandma wrote in her journal yesterday. I mean, the entry I read yesterday. About legacy." "What did she say?" "She said legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what you set in motion." He looked out at the city lights passing by. "I think we set something in motion tonight." I reached over to squeeze his hand, feeling a surge of pride and determination. "I think we did too." That night, as I stood on the back porch again, still in my evening dress with a light wrap against the chill, I felt Eleanor's presence more strongly than ever before. Not as a ghost or even a memory, but as a continuing influence, a voice of both tradition and change. "We're finding our way," I whispered to the night air. "It may not be exactly the path you would have chosen, but I think you'd approve of the direction." The breeze stirred the garden, carrying the scent of the roses Eleanor had planted decades ago. They bloomed now in a garden that was slowly becoming ours, their roots deep in soil she had tended, their flowers opening to a future she had helped to shape but would never see. Legacy, indeed, was what you set in motion. And tonight, standing, between generations, between past and future, I felt the momentum building for the journey ahead. The weeks following the gala brought consequences I'd expected and challenges I hadn't. The foundation board reluctantly established the Eleanor, Mitchell's Student Impact Program, though not without attempting to dilute its requirements. The family divided further into factions, those who saw our approach as refreshing versus those who considered it an unforgivable breach of protocol. Stuart's opposition became more overt. He called an emergency board meeting at Mitchell Holdings, ostensibly to discuss quarterly projections, but actually to question my ability to represent Leo's interests responsibly. "Recent events have raised concerns about decision-making that could impact company valuation and community standing," he began, his gaze moving deliberately around the boardroom before settling on me. "When trustees make impulsive choices without understanding established relationships and protocols, shareholders suffer." I maintained eye contact, refusing to show the anxiety churning beneath my composed exterior. "If you're referring to the Foundation initiative, I'd be happy to outline the positive press coverage and community engagement metrics since the announcement. They suggest an enhancement of both company valuation and community standing." The Kimi PR director nodded slightly, confirming my assessment. Stuart's jaw tightened. "This isn't about one event," he continued. "It's about a pattern of decisions being made without proper business acumen or regard for family traditions." Walter Griffith, still chairing these meetings as he had in Eleanor's time, intervened before Stuart could continue. "Unless you have specific business items to discuss, Stuart, this sounds like a family matter best addressed privately." Stuart wasn't ready to back down. "The company is a family matter. Our reputation, our relationships, our standing in the community, these are built on generations of careful stewardship. When someone without experience or qualifications starts making unilateral decisions—" "If I may," Lawrence interrupted, surprising everyone, including me. "The Student Impact Program has already generated positive media attention and attracted interest from potential new clients who appreciate our community engagement." Rebecca consulted with the marketing team on messaging before making the announcement. "That doesn't sound unilateral or inexperienced to me." The room's dynamics shifted perceptibly. Lawrence rarely contradicted Stuart directly in these settings, preferring to mediate privately. His public support felt like a seismic change in the family power structure. Stuart struggled to maintain his composure. "My concern is about the broader pattern. moving into Eleanor's house without discussing how it would be maintained as a family asset, changing long-standing charitable commitments without board consultation. These decisions affect all of us. Eleanor's will was quite clear about the house, Walter reminded him gently. And family charitable giving has always been at the discretion of individual members, not subject to board approval. The meeting continued with this undercurrent of tension, though it eventually shifted to actual business matters. I participated where I had relevant input, stayed quiet where I didn't, and watched the subtle realignment happening around the table. Not everyone was convinced by Stuart's arguments, it seemed. Afterward, Lawrence caught up with me in the parking garage. "That was well handled," he said as we walked to our cars. "Stuart underestimated you. He thought you'd get emotional or defensive." "I learned from watching Eleanor," I admitted. "She never let them see her sweat." Lawrence nodded. "You should know. He's not giving up. He's been meeting with Dad. And some of the old guard board members privately. I don't know exactly what they're planning, but it goes beyond today's theatrics." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, genuinely curious. Lawrence had always been the diplomat in family conflicts, rarely taking sides openly. He was quiet for a moment, keys jangling in his hand. "I told you before that I trust Eleanor's judgment. But it's more than that now." He looked at me directly. "I've watched you these past months. You're different from Stuart, from Dad, from me even. You're asking questions about impact and purpose that we've been avoiding for years. And Leo." He smiled slightly. "That kid has more integrity in his little finger than most of the board has combined." "Thank you," I said, touched by his assessment. "That means a lot." "Just watch your back," he warned. "Stuart plays to win. Always." Lawrence's warning echoed in my mind over the following days. I found myself looking more carefully at business documents, asking more questions about family, holdings, and thinking strategically about potential vulnerabilities. If Stuart was planning something, I wanted to be prepared. One evening, as Leo and I were having dinner in the kitchen, still our preferred space despite the formal dining room, he noticed my preoccupation. "Is something wrong with the company?" he asked, perceptive as always. I hesitated, not wanting to burden him, but also not wanting to shield him from realities he would eventually need to face. "Not with the company itself. More with family, politics surrounding it." "Stuart?" he guessed. I nodded. "He's unhappy with some of our decisions." Leo considered this as he pushed his food around his plate. "In Grandma's journal yesterday, she wrote about opposition. She said when people fight against your path, it often means you're heading in the right direction." I smiled, grateful once again for Eleanor's foresight in creating those journals. "That sounds like Grandma." "What else did she say?" "She said the real test isn't whether you can avoid opposition, but how you respond to it. With fear and retreat, or with courage and integrity." He looked up at me. "I think we're doing okay on the courage part." Before I could respond, Mrs. Reynolds appeared in the doorway, her expression concerned. "Ms. Mitchell, there's someone here to see you. A Mr. Daniel Turner." Leo's head snapped up. "Dad's here?" I was equally surprised. Daniel and I maintained cordial communication about Leo, but spontaneous visits weren't part of our arrangement, especially given that he lived on the opposite coast. "Did he call ahead?" I asked Mrs. Reynolds. "No, ma'am. He said it was urgent and related to family business." I exchanged a glance with Leo, whose expression had transformed from surprise to guarded anticipation. His relationship with his father was complicated, affectionate but distant, marked by holiday visits and summer vacations that never quite bridged the day-to-day absence. "Show him in," I said. Daniel appeared moments later, looking much as he always did, casual but put together, artistic but not disheveled. His eyes went immediately to Leo, softening with genuine affection. "Hey, buddy," he said. "You've grown about 6 inches since Christmas." Leo stood, accepting his father's embrace with a mixture of eagerness and teenage self-consciousness. 3 inches, maybe, not 6. Daniel laughed, then turned to me. "Rebecca, thanks for seeing me without notice. You're looking well." "Thanks," I said, still confused by his unexpected appearance. "Is everything okay?" He glanced at Mrs. Reynolds, who discreetly withdrew to give us privacy. "That depends on your definition of okay. I got a call from your cousin Stuart last week. He wanted to meet about matters concerning Leo's future. Said it was important, but confidential." My stomach tightened. "And did you meet with him?" Daniel nodded. "Yesterday, at his office. He had quite the proposal for me." Leo looked between us, confusion evident. "What does Stuart want with Dad?" Daniel's expression turned serious. "He suggested that I should consider challenging the trust arrangement. As Leo's biological father, he said I might have grounds to petition for greater oversight of his inheritance, especially given his age." "That's ridiculous," I said, anger rising. "The trust is legally sound. Mr. Harrington made sure of it." "I know," Daniel agreed. "I'm not here because I'm considering it. I'm here to warn you that Stuart's getting desperate. He offered me a consultation fee for cooperating, $200,000 to start, with more if the challenge succeeded." Leo's face paled. "He tried to bribe you?" Daniel's expression softened as he looked at his son. "He called it compensation for my time and inconvenience. But yes, essentially." "And you said no," Leo stated, more confirmation than question. "Of course I said no." Daniel ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Leo had inherited. "I'm not interested in disrupting your life or trying to control something Eleanor clearly intended for you. But Stuart won't stop with me. He's looking for any leverage he can find." I felt a complex mixture of gratitude and concern. Daniel and I had our issues in the past, but he'd always been decent when it mattered most. "Thank you for telling us, for coming in person." He looked around the kitchen, taking in the evidence of our new life. Leo's textbooks on the counter, my design sketches for a client project, Mrs. Reynolds's freshly baked cookies cooling on. A rack. "This is the famous Mitchell mansion, huh? It suits you guys better than I would have expected." "We're still getting used to it," I admitted, "but it's starting to feel like home." Leo hesitated, then asked, "Do you want to see the rest of it?" "My room has a view of the whole garden." Daniel's face lit up. "I'd love that." As they headed upstairs, Leo chattering about his space and the robotics workshop he'd set up in one of the spare rooms, I remained in the kitchen, mind racing. Stuart's move was bold and potentially damaging. Even if a legal challenge ultimately failed, it could create exactly the kind of public spectacle Eleanor had wanted to avoid. Mrs. Reynolds returned after Daniel and Leo went upstairs. "Tea?" she offered, already filling the kettle. "Something stronger might be better," I said with a weak smile. She nodded understanding. Mr. Stuart always did play dirty. Even as a boy, he couldn't stand losing. "What would Eleanor have done?" I asked, not really expecting an answer. Mrs. Reynolds considered this as she arranged cups on a tray. She would have anticipated his move and countered before he even made it, but she had decades of experience you don't have yet. She paused, then added, "She also would have gone straight to the source of his power." His father, I realized. My Uncle William. Precisely. Stuart may act independently, but William's approval still matters to him. Always has. Uncle William was the family patriarch now, theoretically retired but still wielding considerable influence from his lake house 2 hours north of the city. He rarely attended family functions due to health concerns, which meant I hadn't seen him since Eleanor's funeral. Daniel and Leo returned about an hour later, both more relaxed than before. Something about their shared enthusiasm for the telescope Leo had set up in his room had bridged some of the distance between them. "I should get going," Daniel said, checking his watch. "My flight back is early tomorrow." "Where are you staying?" I asked. "The airport Marriott." "Glamorous, I know." I made a split-second decision. "You could stay here. There's plenty of room, and it would give you more time with Leo." Both Leo and Daniel looked surprised by the offer. After a moment, Daniel nodded. "I'd like that, if—" "You're sure it's not an imposition?" "It's a big house," I said simply, "and Leo would enjoy the extra time." After Leo had shown Daniel to one of the guest rooms, he found me in the study, reviewing Eleanor's personal files for anything that might help us counter Stuart's maneuvers. "Thanks," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "For letting Dad stay." I looked up from the papers. "You don't have to thank me for that. He's your father." "Yeah, but it couldn't have been easy to offer, considering everything." I thought about this, about the complex history between Daniel and me, about the pain of his leaving and the years of rebuilding that followed. "The past is the past," I said finally. "What matters is now. What's best for you?" Leo nodded, absorbing this. "Grandma wrote about forgiveness in her journal. She said it's not about forgetting what happened, but about not letting it control your future." She was a wise woman, I agreed, much wiser than I understood when she was alive. The next morning, I drove to Uncle William's lake house, leaving Leo to spend the day with his father. The drive gave me time to think, to plan my approach. William had always been intimidating, a harder, less diplomatic version of my father, with a blunt manner that Eleanor had sometimes tempered but never entirely softened. The house came into view as I rounded the final curve, a sprawling cedar and glass structure overlooking the water. It had been built as a vacation home decades ago, but William had moved there permanently after his wife died, preferring its isolation to the social obligations of city life. His caretaker met me at the door, a stocky man with a military bearing, who had been with William for years. "He's on the deck," he informed me. "He's having a good day, but don't tire him." I found my uncle seated in a large chair facing the lake, a plaid blanket over his legs despite the mild weather. At 78, he had grown frailer than I remembered, his once commanding presence diminished by age and illness. "Rebecca?" he acknowledged as I approached. "This is unexpected." "Hello, Uncle William. Thank you for seeing me without notice." He gestured to the chair beside him. "Sit. Say what you came to say. I assume it's about Stuart's latest scheme." I shouldn't have been surprised that he already knew. Little in the family escaped his awareness, even from his self-imposed exile. "Yes, he tried to recruit Leo's father to challenge the trust." William snorted. "Predictable but clumsy. Stuart lacks finesse." I watched my uncle's face, trying to gauge his position. "Are you supporting his efforts?" "To undermine Eleanor's clearly stated wishes? No." He turned to look at me directly, his gaze still sharp despite his physical decline. "I may not agree with all her choices, but I respected my sister enough to honor her decisions." Relief flooded through me, though I tried not to show it. "Stuart seems determined to fight this, with or without your support." "Stuart has always believed himself entitled to more than he's earned," William said with surprising candor. "His father indulged him. I cautioned against it, but brothers don't always take advice about parenting." I'd never heard William criticize his brother or nephew so directly. "I'm not here to cause a family rift," I said carefully. "I just want to protect what Eleanor intended for Leo." William was silent for a long moment, watching a boat traverse the lake's surface. "You know, Eleanor and I disagreed on many things over the years. Business strategies, family matters, political views, but I never questioned her judgment about character." He turned back to me. "She saw something in you. Something beyond the shallow measurements the rest of the family applies." "I hope to prove her right," I said. unexpectedly moved by his assessment. You already have, from what I hear. That foundation initiative was well played, meaningful change wrapped in respect for tradition. His lips twitched in what might have been a smile. Eleanor would have appreciated the strategy. The conversation shifted then to practical matters. William might be physically removed from family business, but his mind remained engaged with its operations and politics. He offered insights into Stuart's likely next moves, weaknesses in his position, and potential allies I hadn't considered. As I prepared to leave, William said, "Tell Leo something for me." "Of course. Tell him legacy isn't a gift. It's a responsibility. Not just to preserve what came before, but to improve it for those who come after." Eleanor understood that. "I think he will too." I nodded, recognizing the truth in his words. "I'll tell him." The drive back gave me time to process our conversation and formulate a plan. By the time I reached the house, I felt more centered, more certain of my path forward than I had since the will reading. Daniel was preparing to leave when I arrived, his overnight bag by the door. "Leo's saying goodbye to Mrs. Reynolds," he explained. "That woman makes the best waffles I've ever tasted." "She's a treasure," I agreed. "Thank you again for warning us about Stuart." He shrugged. "Couldn't do otherwise. Not with Leo's future at stake." We stood in momentary awkward silence, two people connected by history and a remarkable son, but otherwise living separate lives. "I was wrong," he said suddenly. "Back then, when I left, I told myself I was doing you both a favor, that I wasn't cut out for family life, that you deserved better. But the truth is, I was scared. Of failing. Of not measuring up to whatever standard I thought existed. I hadn't expected this confession. That was a long time ago. Yeah, but seeing you now, how you've handled all this, how you've raised Leo to be so," he searched for the word, "principled. It makes me realize what I missed by running away from challenges instead of facing them." Before I could respond, Leo appeared, saving us from the weight of a conversation neither of us was fully prepared for. Daniel embraced him, promising to call more regularly, to visit again soon. I stood back, watching their interaction with complex emotions. Gratitude that Leo had his father in his life, however imperfectly, and a new appreciation for the strength it had taken to raise him largely on my own. After Daniel left, Leo and I sat on the back porch, continuing what had become an evening ritual. The garden was in full bloom now, a riot of colors Eleanor had planned but wouldn't see. "I met with Uncle William today," I told him. "He had a message for you." I relayed William's words about legacy as responsibility, watching Leo absorb them with the thoughtful concentration that was becoming his hallmark. "I've been thinking about that," he said finally, "about what I want to do with all this when I'm older." "You have time to figure it out," I assured him. "Years before any decisions have to be made." "I know, but Grandma wrote that good decisions come from clear values. You have to know what matters to you before you can decide what to do." I smiled at his earnestness. "And what matters to you, Leo?" He considered this with the gravity of a philosopher rather than a 13-year-old. "Making things better, not just bigger. Creating opportunities for people who don't usually get them. Building something that helps people instead of just making money." My heart swelled with pride. Those are wonderful values to build from. "What about you?" he asked. "What matters to you, now that everything's changed?" The question caught me off guard. I'd been so focused on navigating immediate challenges, on protecting Leo's inheritance and honoring Eleanor's trust, that I hadn't fully considered my own values in this new reality. "Truth," I said finally, surprising myself with the answer. "Seeing things as they really are, not as tradition or expectation says they should be. And courage. to act on that truth even when it's difficult. Leo nodded, understanding. Like Grandma did with her will. She saw the truth about everyone and had the courage to act on it, even knowing it would cause problems. Exactly like that, I agreed. The following week brought a series of rapid developments. First, Stuart formally petitioned the board to review my competence as trustee, citing concerning patterns of decision-making contrary to company interests. The very same day, several foundation board members resigned in protest over the new Student Impact Program requirements, claiming they were unworkable and disrespectful to established processes. Rather than responding defensively, I took a page from Eleanor's playbook. I scheduled individual meetings with key board members not firmly in Stuart's camp, presenting detailed analysis of the positive press and community engagement generated by the foundation changes. I invited respected arts educators to present data on effective program metrics. And most effectively, I arranged for several students from underserved communities to share how access to arts education had transformed their opportunities. The tide began to turn. Board members who had initially been skeptical found themselves impressed by the thoughtfulness of our approach. The vacancies on the foundation board were filled with younger, more diverse leaders who brought fresh perspectives and genuine commitment to the mission. Stuart wasn't finished, however. His next move was more personal. "Did you see this?" Lawrence asked, stopping by the house one evening with a local magazine in hand. The cover featured a glossy photo of Julia, Stuart's wife, posing in Eleanor's garden, our garden, with the headline, "Continuing the Mitchell Legacy. Julia speaks on family, philanthropy, and the future." I flipped to the article with growing disbelief. Julia described herself as carrying forward Eleanor Mitchell's vision for the foundation, conveniently omitting any mention of the trust or Leo's role. She referred to the house as the family, a state where we gather for important occasions, implying a communal ownership that simply didn't exist. Most egregiously, she positioned Stuart as the natural heir to Eleanor's business leadership, describing his deep bond with his grandmother and commitment to her values. "This is unbelievable," I said, handing the magazine back to Lawrence. "Did they even fact-check any of this?" "It's a society magazine, not investigative journalism," he replied dryly. "Stuart and Julia have been courting the editor for years. Free tickets to charity events, invitations to exclusive gatherings." I considered my options. A public rebuttal would create exactly the kind of family spectacle I'd been trying to avoid. Ignoring it felt like conceding ground. Neither seemed right. That evening, I shared the article with Leo, wanting him to hear about it from me rather than stumbling across it or hearing from classmates. "They're trying to rewrite history," he said, remarkably calm despite the provocation, "making themselves the main characters in Grandma's story." "Yes," I agreed. "That's exactly what they're doing." Leo was quiet for a moment, then said, "You know what Grandma would do? She'd let them talk while she kept working. Actions matter, more than words." The wisdom in this approach struck me forcefully. Eleanor had never wasted energy on public disputes when she could focus on meaningful action instead. Rather than fighting Stuart's narrative directly, we could simply build a more compelling reality through our actual work. The next day, I called Mr. Harrington with a proposal. The first Eleanor Mitchell Emerging Artists Showcase would highlight work from students in the Impact Program, hosted at the Mitchell family home with business leaders, educators, and community members in attendance. Not a society event, but a genuine celebration of young talent and opportunity. The planning consumed the next several weeks. Leo threw himself into the project, working with the student advisory board he'd helped establish, ensuring the event reflected their vision rather than adult preconceptions. I coordinated with arts educators and program directors, focusing on creating genuine opportunities for the students beyond the showcase itself: mentorships, internships, continuing support. Word spread quickly through both business and arts communities. The RSVP list grew beyond our initial expectations, including not just the usual philanthropy crowd, but working artists, educators, community leaders, and families of participating students. Even my parents agreed to attend, though Stuart and Julia declined with a terse note about prior commitments. The evening of the showcase arrived with perfect early fall weather. The house and gardens had been transformed, with student artwork displayed throughout both indoor and outdoor spaces. Young musicians performed in the conservatory Eleanor had added decades ago. Culinary arts students prepared hors d'oeuvres under the guidance of a local chef who had volunteered his expertise. As guests began to arrive, I stood in the foyer, where Eleanor had always greeted visitors, feeling her presence beside me in spirit, if not in body. Leo stood next to me, nervous but determined in his suit, greeting each arrival with genuine welcome regardless of their status or connections. William surprised us by attending, his first public appearance in nearly a year. He arrived with his caretaker, moving slowly but deliberately to embrace both Leo and me before anyone else could command his attention. "You've done well," he told us quietly. "Eleanor would be proud, not just of what you've created, but of who you've become in creating it." The evening unfolded with a natural rhythm, different from the careful choreography of traditional Mitchell events, but somehow more genuine. Students proudly explained their work to engaged listeners. Business leaders exchanged cards with young artists showing particular promise. Educators connected with potential program supporters. The artificial barriers between giving and receiving, between privilege and need, seemed temporarily dissolved in an atmosphere of mutual respect and genuine interest. Midway through the evening, Leo tugged at my sleeve. "Come with me," he whispered. "There's something I want to show you." He led me through the crowd to Eleanor's study, which we had kept largely unchanged out of respect for her memory. To my surprise, he had added one element, a simple plaque beside the door that read, "The Eleanor Mitchell Legacy Room, where values become vision." Inside, he had created a small exhibition chronicling Eleanor's journey from young businesswoman in a male-dominated era to the family matriarch who had ultimately chosen to disrupt tradition for the sake of genuine progress. Photographs, news, clippings, and excerpts from interviews told a story of principle, perseverance, and evolution. Most moving was the final display, Eleanor's journal open to a page Leo had carefully selected, with her elegant handwriting clearly visible. Legacy is not what we leave behind, but what we set in motion. Not what we preserve unchanged, but what we improve for those who follow. My greatest hope is not that my decisions will be maintained exactly as I made them, but that they will inspire better ones from those who come after me. Tears filled my eyes as I read her words. "When did you plan all this?" "After we saw the magazine article," Leo explained, "I realized the best answer wasn't arguing with their version of Grandma's legacy. It was showing the real thing." I embraced him, overwhelmed with pride and gratitude. "You are extraordinary, Leopold Mitchell. And you're right. This is exactly what she would have wanted." We returned to the main event to find a surprise visitor had arrived, Daniel, who had flown in specifically for the showcase despite having no advance notice of it. He stood somewhat awkwardly near the refreshment table, clearly out of his element in the Mitchell social world, but determined to support his son. "Dad!" Leo exclaimed, genuinely delighted. "You came!" "Wouldn't miss it," Daniel replied, embracing him. "This is incredible, buddy. Really incredible." The evening continued with speeches from program participants, performances from young musicians, and finally, a brief address from Leo himself. Standing on the staircase where generations of Mitchells had made announcements, he spoke not with the practiced Polish of his relatives, but with authentic passion that commanded attention nonetheless. "My grandmother believed that privilege comes with responsibility," he told the assembled guests. "Not just to maintain what we've been given, but to expand it, to make it more inclusive, more meaningful. The Eleanor Mitchell Student Impact Program isn't about charity. It's about opportunity, about recognizing talent and potential wherever it exists, not just where it's easiest to see. I watched him from the sidelines, this remarkable young man who had absorbed Eleanor's wisdom and was already beginning to transform it into his own vision. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy. Stuart's opposition wouldn't vanish overnight. The weight of legacy would continue to bring both privileges and burdens. But in that moment, watching Leo stand tall where Eleanor once had, seeing the genuine impact of the work we'd begun together, I felt a profound sense of rightness. We were still finding our way, still learning to balance tradition with innovation, still discovering our own voices within the Mitchell family story. Yet one thing was certain. Eleanor had been right to trust us with her legacy. Not because we would preserve it exactly as she had shaped it, but because we would honor its core, truth, while helping it evolve for a new generation. The path forward would have challenges, setbacks, and victories yet unimagined. But we would walk it with clarity of purpose and the courage to remain true to our values. As the evening drew to a close, guests departing with renewed energy and commitment, I found myself on the back porch again, looking out at the garden where Eleanor had spent so many contemplative evenings. The legacy she had entrusted to us was not just in the house, the business shares, or the family name. It was in the courage to see truth clearly and act on it boldly, even when tradition pushed against change. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Stuart would continue his campaign. The business would face decisions requiring careful navigation. Leo would continue growing into his complex role, balancing teenage normalcy with extraordinary responsibility. And I would continue learning to trust my own judgment, to lead with both strength and compassion, to honor Eleanor's faith while forging my own path. But tonight, watching the garden where Eleanor's roses still bloomed under a canopy of stars, I felt her final lesson taking root within me. Legacy isn't what you inherit. It's what you choose to become because of it. And that choice, made day by day, moment by moment, is the greatest responsibility and the greatest gift of all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.